in the highways, in the hedges, in the highways, in the hedges.
Hey, this is L4J, Living for Jesus Bible Study Ministry, my personal ministry, and I'm Mike Clark, coming to you from Carabel, from my home office. And we're continuing our study of the book of Job. There was fault on both sides because neither one was where God wanted us to be. Elihu criticized his friends for not doing better with all of their efforts supposedly to comfort him. They had not comforted him. They had provided more discouragement. Now Elihu turns to Job and his friends, setting the record straight. Here comes the mediation. And this is in chapters 33 through probably 35. He rebukes Job for claiming absolute innocence. Job, you act as if there's nothing wrong with you. You act as if you're perfect. There's nothing in this about God. You make reference to him, but it's all about your own goodness, your own righteousness. You blame God for the suffering. God has no obligation to explain to you or to me or to anybody else why he does things. Why doesn't he have an obligation? Because he's God. And he's God. And that's the answer to that. Nothing else required. God speaks through pain and suffering sometimes. Illnesses can be a means of communication with God to us. Now, that doesn't mean that every time we're sick, it's because God's showing us something, although we always have lessons to learn. But God has the power to heal and to remove pain. Sometimes we are ill, we have sickness, we're in pain, and God heals that sickness and takes away the pain, and it brings glory to him. But on a higher level, a lost sinner, that's the worst kind of illness there can be. A lost sinner means hell-bound, means separation from God. And the healing is in the Messiah. It's in God's love for mankind and his gift of Jesus Christ, his son, who paid the price for our sin. Now, Elihu turns to the three friends. And as he turns to the friends, he asks them to check his words out. In other words, I'm not going to try to convince you to believe what I'm saying because I'm saying it. But I invite you, I encourage you to check out my words to see if they're true, because he knew they were true. And he then states that God is never guilty of injustice. No matter what it might look like to us, God is a just God, and he's merciful. So he's not going to treat anybody with any injustice. He, in fact, is the source of all of life, including those who don't accept him and his love for them. He is the reason that we take our next breath, that our heart beats the next time. He gave us life. All of life is from God. He goes on to present that it is unthinkable to condemn the sovereign God of the universe, the one who created the universe and created everything in it and created it good. He went on to explain that there is no wickedness that is hid from God. He knows everything. So we really don't have to explain to him about what somebody's doing, but we might want to think about what we're doing, because he already knows what wicked is and who's doing it. Now, turning back to Job, who has been throughout this time promoting rebellion against him going through pain and suffering. when he was not deserving of it. And he was pointing out that all those people who were guilty of sin and evil doing and wickedness, and he claimed that his suffering was unmerited. Now, in a way, that's kind of a bad thing toward God. You're in charge. You're causing all this suffering. And look what all these other people, they're going about their business, having fun and not suffering. And here I am without sin, and yet look at the condition that I'm in. Anybody could see this and say, well, they certainly don't want to follow God, because look what I'm... That's kind of the thought that Job was communicating. And Elihu turned back to address that with Job. He scolds Job for acting as if he was more righteous than was the case. He went on to correct Job and saying the righteous that you have doesn't pay. It doesn't even count. Even if we do not see God, he does see us. Sometimes I think the world has forgotten that. We can't hide from God. He sees us, whether we see him or not. We are to trust him and to be humble. Now, that's a message to Job, because Job was responding to all the pain and suffering that he had without really looking to God and trusting him that he knew what he was doing, because God knew. Elihu suggests that had Job been more submissive and had a contrite heart, then his suffering might have been over. He didn't say it would have been, but he was pointing out, Job, you might be saying the wrong things, but your heart's not right. Get your heart right. Don't be blaming God. He had been presenting himself as self-righteous. And that is a message to us. Remember, in this case, the analogy is that Job is a typical representative of Mike and of you as a human being. And we have a tendency to make our case before God that we're so good. Look at this thing I did. Look at that thing I did. When that's missing the boat. We can't get anywhere good on our own works. But we need to praise him for what he has done, because he's the one that provided the way of salvation. In chapter 37, we are reminded that God is in control. God is sovereign. He causes whatever to happen. Remember, we look back and throughout a lot of the Old Testament, the people of God looked at him as the one responsible for whatever happened, whether it be good or bad. A lot of the Oriental religions that began to have an influence, the false religions, had this little circle with equal parts of one good, one bad, one white, one black, and they were equal, vying with one another. And the truth of the matter is, God is sovereign over all. And the people in the Old Testament who were God's people looked at whatever happened, they looked to God about it. They didn't look to Satan, they looked to God. Now, obviously, Satan did some of it, but they still didn't let him take their mind away from realizing that it was all under God's control. And that's what Elihu was trying to say to Job and to his friends. God is sovereign. He causes whatever to happen, and he causes it to happen, or allows it to happen, if we want to say it that way, because of his own purposes. He doesn't owe anybody, including us, an explanation. It could be for correction. It could be for correction of the earth, the atmosphere, the environment. It could be for mercy, to provide what we can't even understand, mercy for people who deserve punishment. that deserve eternal punishment. Could be for mercy. I think about the first part of that, about healing the land. My idea is, if we were following in the will of God as a human race, then we wouldn't have to be worrying about climate change so much. God does a wonderful job of taking care of the world he created. Now, we might, we need to be good stewards and that sort of thing. I don't mean to take that overboard. But the indication is that God has intervened many times to do correction, to preserve, and to heal the land. Elihu speaks directly to Job now, and he says, and I can hear a boss man, I can hear a teacher, and God. Now, Elihu comes to Job after all of this was said, and he looks directly at Job, an elder. And Elihu says, stand still. And I can just imagine, with the inspiration of those words, Job stood still. And I think that was more than just standing. I think it was, hear me afresh. Forget all that stuff you've been talking about. Hear this. Sometimes in this world we get so busy, we need some authority to tell us, stand still. And you know what he said when he said stand still? He said, consider the wondrous works of God. So when I'm belly aching, or I'm complaining, or I'm trying to solve the world's problems, and I'm really getting away from God, the Holy Spirit says, stand still, Mike, stand still. Consider the wondrous works of God. And obviously I think of How Great Thou Art, and that wonderful song, and what beautiful words it has. So when we consider the awesomeness of God, so many of the things that had been so big, such huge monsters in our life, just kind of dry up and flutter away. So sometimes we need to stand still and consider the wondrous works of God. Our ways do not compare to God's. His power, his judgment, they're his alone. They're not ours. And in fact, God needs no help from us in regard to those things. So, we better fear, a reverential fear of God. That is a fundamental thing, just like blocking and tackling in football. Fear of God is important for us as his children. And it's a reverential fear. It is recognizing he's all-powerful and he wants our good. If there is no respect for God, no fear of God, such as those who do not fear God in their lives, they do not have wisdom. It is wise to fear God. It is unwise to not fear him. Now we're stopping here for now, but we've heard the truth now from the mediator, and it was clearly delivered to Job and to his friends by one who was fair, one who was objective, and one who was the bearer of the truth of God. A good example of God's plan for the Messiah to come later in their case. In our case, he came years ago. Now, what comes next? Well, it's coming to decision time. The friends have heard what Elihu has said. They remember what they said. Job, on the other hand, He's heard what Elihu has said, and he remembers what he said. It's decision time. Mike, you heard both sides. What's your decision? Friend, brother and sister, Bible study partner, what's your decision? Are we going to be on God's side, realizing our unworthiness and depending on Him? Or are we going to be on the other side and we're going to be selfish and we're going to be depending on our own good works and building our own case and explaining to the world and to God how good we are? If we do that, then we're not fearing God and we're not wise. If we're going to be like the friends and come up with nothing but discouragement and ridicule, there's no wisdom there, and the result of that will be separation from God. So, it's decision time. Amazing how we can learn such good things about God and His love for us through study of a man who was a God-fearing man, but who suffered much loss, much pain, and it's just a matter of part of what God is teaching us through the schoolmaster of the Old Testament. And let me say this as I go. I thought about this early on when I was studying. I thought, this is really, really serious for God to use the pain and suffering of a God-fearing man to teach us a lesson about salvation. I said, God, why would you do that? And before I could get the question out of my mouth, the answer came to my mind, and it is, Mike, there's nothing any more serious than salvation that can only be found through faith in Jesus Christ. God bless you, and be looking forward to lesson 16.